Ella Lyman Cabot, writing more than 100 years ago, said, "We sometimes speak as if the past were over and done with. That's past. That's out of date. That's ended. Yet try to obliterate in your thought all that is past. It is impossible, of course, because in doing so, we obliterate ourselves. Without the help of what we call the past, we could not live at all. The past, instead of being done with, is then the real fiber of the world as we know it. Just as the food we eat nourishes us till it becomes what we act with, so the past is always what we think with." Today, I'm reclaiming a few thinkers from our Unitarian past because I think they have something to say to us today. And here it is. So, you've been looking for a religious home. You aren't looking for the latest religious fad like Scientology or mega churches with bowling alleys, or the more bizarre forms of fundamentalism that think Donald Trump is the reincarnation of Cyrus the Great who sent the Jews home from Babylon. You want community. You want social justice. You want to experience and honor your kinship with all life. You want a certain amount of comforting ritual and celebration without dogma. You want to have your mind and body on the same page. You want that thing the Buddhists seem to have, that peace of mind and calm, that feeling of oneness with all that is, of awe and reverence and gratitude, what Western religion calls mysticism. You're willing to listen, but you don't want anyone telling you what to do or think. You want a shared story that speaks to you. You want an inclusive faith that doesn't discriminate based on gender or race or sexual orientation. I hope that's the kind of faith you are looking for, because it is, boy, have I got a religion for you. Looking around what's out there, it's hard to find all those things in one package. The Buddhists are very accepting and respectful of living things and really good at dealing with suffering, but they're kind of passive when it comes to social justice. You have to do a lot of searching in the many varieties of Christianity to get a package that doesn't discriminate or exclude and is earth-centered and affirms a commitment to social justice. Catholics, for example, are really good at ritual and social justice and helping people find that common centeredness we call mysticism, but they're not quite as good in the inclusiveness or not telling you what to believe. You can be a pagan or a Wiccan and get some good ritual and be encouraged to love the earth and resonate with its rhythms, but again, it doesn't have quite as much mysticism as some of the others, and it's not as activist about hunger and social issues. You could convert to Judaism or Islam, which are also rich in ritual, but they can be pretty heavy on the rules, and they may be ethnically different enough so that you don't quite feel at home. All of these are great religions. They're wonderfully rich and meaningful religious paths for many people. But for those of us who want the package I described, where is that religion? Well, my friends, consider the words of T.S. Eliot, who was raised Unitarian, but God knows why, left the faith. He wrote, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." I say that as a native New Englander, like Eliot. I was raised in the Congregational Church of America's Unitarian religious ancestors. The very church founded by pilgrims or separatists in Plymouth today is now First Parish Unitarian Universalist, gathered 1625. And yet, I didn't hear of Unitarians until I was in college. And I heard of the Transcendentalists even later because I wasn't an English major. And Transcendentalists are apparently not really big in the economics curriculum. So, chief among our often overlooked religious ancestors are, ironically, a group who left Unitarianism to design a faith of their very own some 170 years ago. In abandoning Unitarianism, which most, but not all of them did, they birthed a recreation of that faith tradition that is not just our history, but our very present and our expected future. These hippies of the mid-19th century were mystical, nature-centered, inclusive, and passionate about social action. We are who and what we are because of Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Margaret Fuller, the Peabody sisters, Bronson Alcott, and Theodore Parker. And the church that they abandoned, all but Parker, eventually embraced their religious understanding and blended it with the missing piece, community, in order to secure a tradition that has enriched generations that followed. So, if you wish to know thyself, come with me to the religious version of Ancestry.com and rediscover with me your faith tradition and your community's roots. And most of all, rediscover our story. Our story. Yes, we have Michael Servetus and Francis David and the other pantheon of heroes from the 16th and 17th centuries in Europe. But there is another tale to tell, the creation of a religion native to this continent with its own story, its own founders, its own heroes and heroines, and, as I just indicated, its own shadow side. Now, I know that transcendentalism is a long and maybe unfamiliar word. I have an interesting history with long words. When I worked in Washington, D.C. for a year, I would call people up because I had to talk to people around the country about my project, and I'd say, this is Holley Ulbrich. I'm calling from the U.S. Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations. And if they didn't hang up at the end of that long recitation, then I would get to talk to them. When I was a child, my mother told me that the longest word in the dictionary was anti-disestablishmentarianism. And then, as a grown-up, studying UU history, I discovered that there were Unitarians among the anti-disestablishmentarians. Now, establishmentarianism is easy. There's an established church. It's supported by taxes. It may or may not exclude other churches, but this is the official church. And it's forbidden by the First Amendment, but states until the 1830s had established churches. In Virginia, it was the Episcopal Church. In Connecticut, where I grew up, it was the Congregational Church. And after the Unitarians split from the Congregationalists, both the Unitarians and the Congregationalists were state-supported established churches according to the standard orders of Connecticut, and they liked it that way. So our Unitarian ancestors, not the Universalists, just the Unitarians, were in favor of establishment, meaning they were anti-dis-establishmentarianism. So, if you thought much about that word, that's where the story comes from. So, yes, transcendentalism is a long and unfamiliar word, and if you really embrace it and call yourself a transcendentalist, Unitarian Universalist, people will ask no more questions about your religion. I didn't know a lot about them even after going to seminary and even after taking a class in UU history. So when Terry first invited me to preach that first sermon on transcendentalism, always up to a challenge, I started down that rabbit hole, and I found a whole lot of really interesting rabbits. You have a community, a local congregation, and so do I. And almost every community, especially every faith community, has a story. So who were these people? How did they shape our faith tradition? And what are their answers to the search for spiritual experience, inclusivity, social justice, and making a unified whole of mind, body, and spirit? The story of the transcendentalist is the story of any serious search for a life of truth and meaning and authenticity. We all do that independently. They did it in each other's company and passed it on to future generations. In fact, they had a thing called the Transcendentalist Club, which, unlike most organizations in the 19th century, freely admitted women. Unlike Buddhism, Christianity, or Islam, there is no central character who rises above the others. They are more like Judaism with a succession of heroic figures, or Hinduism with its multiple avatars of the sacred. Don't believe those English teachers who claim that the Transcendentalists were a literary movement. Yeah, they were part of a literary movement, along with non-Transcendentalists Herman Melville and Nathaniel Hawthorne and Walt Whitman, who all lived in the neighborhood of Concord. But at their core, they were a religious movement in a century filled with much odder religious movements. The Mormons, the Christian Scientists, the Seventh-day Adventists, and the Jehovah's Witnesses were all born and raised during that same time period in history. Compared to them, the Unitarians look pretty mainstream. So, first, the cast of characters. They were readers and writers, teachers and learners. They lectured. They published a magazine called The Dial. They contemplated nature. They explored Eastern religions. They were mystic, meaning they participated in the direct experience of the sacred. They were committed not just to their own spiritual growth, but to making it possible for everyone, regardless of race, gender, or social status, to have that same opportunity. Stars of the show: Emerson, Thoreau, Fuller, the Peabody sisters, Parker, and Bronson Alcott. 3 women, 4 men. Emerson was an ordained but non-practicing Unitarian minister who actually traveled to India and studied what was available on Eastern religions. And you're going to hear more about that a couple of months from now when Terry is going to share the pulpit with a Hindu. He played a major role in developing interest among Americans in this different way of being religious. Thoreau was a deep thinker, an advocate for the simple life, a lover of nature, and the inventor, Thoreau was a deep thinker, an advocate for the simple life, a lover of nature, and the inventor of the term civil disobedience, when he refused to pay taxes and went to jail in protest over the Mexican War. Margaret Fuller was the mother of American feminism, a writer, an international reporter, a teacher, a lecturer. The Peabody sisters were teachers, writers, thinkers, and activists. Bronson Alcott, the father of Louisa May, was the poster boy for the 1960s impractical hippie commune minus the drugs, and a venture called Fruitlands that did not prove to be fruitful. He was also an educator, and fortunately his daughter Louisa May, also a good Unitarian, saved the family fortune, or what was left of it, by writing Little Women. Theodore Parker was a conductor on the Underground Railroad and remained in the faith and continued to minister to Unitarian congregations. Parker, Thoreau, and Fuller all died young. Emerson developed dementia, so the movement appeared to have died out.